The room was quiet, heavy with the weight of a trial that had already taken over headlines across the nation. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but that didn't stop reporters from packing every available seat along the back wall. Everyone wanted to witness what was being called the most politically sensitive trial since Watergate. The case against Trump Enterprises was more than just about money. It was about legacy, power, and truth. The wooden doors of Courtroom 7A opened with a slow creak. Judge Andrew H. Stones walked in wearing his long black robe, his steps confident, his expression unreadable. He was tall, gray-haired, and sharp-eyed. For over 20 years he had ruled in federal courts, gaining a reputation for harsh wit and liberal opinions. Today, however, his confidence felt different, almost too comfortable. Like a man who thought nothing could touch him. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Everyone stood. The judge took his seat, peering over his rimless glasses. "You may be seated," he said. At the witness stand sat a tall young man in a navy blue suit. Barron Trump, only 19, but his presence was undeniable. 6'7". He stood out physically, but it wasn't just his height. He was calm, his expression unreadable, eyes steady. He had his father's jawline but carried none of the usual flash or ego. He looked like someone who had seen too much too soon. Whispers spread quickly across the room. No one had expected Barron to appear in person. Many believed he would submit a written statement, or perhaps a video deposition. But Attorney General Pam Bondi had insisted on his appearance. And when Bondi insisted, people listened. Pam Bondi sat just feet away at the prosecutor's table, her sharp blue suit pressed to perfection, a stack of documents laid neatly before her. Her eyes did not leave Judge Stones, not even for a second. She knew him, she knew his style, and she knew today was going to be different. Judge Stones cleared his throat. "Ms. Bondi, are you ready to present your witness?" he asked tone, dry and laced with superiority. "We are, Your Honor," she replied. "Well then," Stones said, looking down at Barron with a faint grin. "Let's hear what the heir to a crumbling empire has to say." Gasps filled the room. It was a jab, a deep one. Barron didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He just blinked, slowly. Pam Bondi stood, not saying a word yet. She took a slow breath, then looked at the judge, eyes like steel. "Your Honor," she said, voice steady. "We are here to discuss evidence and legal violations, not to mock a witness for his family background." Judge Stones chuckled lightly. "Course, Ms. Bondi. Let's proceed then." But the damage was done. Reporters were already texting, typing, sending updates to their outlets. On social media, the clip of the judge's comment would soon be all over the internet. And it wasn't just rude, it was personal. Barron remained still. He looked down at his hands briefly, then back up. His voice, when he finally spoke, was deeper than expected, calm and measured. "I'm here to tell the truth," he said simply. "That's all." Bondi gave a small nod, then handed him a document. "Can you confirm what this is?" "Yes," Barron replied. "It's a ledger I found while organizing my father's post-presidency assets. I wasn't supposed to look through some of these folders, but I found it by accident." "What did you notice about the ledger?" "There were transfers," he said, "to accounts I'd never heard of. In Cyprus, and later in Montenegro." A ripple moved through the room again. Journalists leaned forward. Cyprus and Montenegro. Those words weren't just about finance, they suggested something more, something international. Judge Stones leaned back, tapping his pen on the bench. "So the boy is now an expert on global banking," he said, smirking. Pam Bondi stood taller. "Objection, Your Honor." "Withdrawn," Stones said, waving his hand. But his smirk remained. Barron said nothing. He didn't need to. His eyes said everything. He wasn't a boy anymore. And this wasn't about protecting his father. It was about something far more dangerous. Something he might have stumbled into by mistake. In the back of the courtroom, two men in suits whispered to each other. They weren't journalists. They weren't legal staff. One of them wore a DOJ pin. The other had an earpiece. Pam Bondi returned. To her seat, flipping through her file again, one page, folded neatly, was marked with a red tab. She hadn't shown it yet. She was waiting, because this wasn't just about evidence, it was about leverage. And Judge Stones had just walked into something much bigger than a courtroom insult. He just didn't know it yet. The courtroom buzzed as the judge's insult echoed in everyone's minds. Most people didn't dare say a word, but you could feel the shift in the room. Something had cracked. Not just inside the court, but outside too. By the time Barron Trump stepped down from the witness stand, clips of the hearing had already begun spreading online. Someone had caught audio from the courtroom and leaked it. On Twitter, a 10-second video of Judge Stones saying, "Heir to." A crumbling empire was gaining thousands of views per minute. On cable news, pundits were already split, some calling it judicial misconduct. Others praising it as truthful courtroom candor. Calm? Bondi sat silently flipping through the folder with the red tab document. Her face remained calm, but she was tracking everything the mood in the courtroom. The journalists, and most of all, the judge. She had known Stones for years. In public, he wore the robe of neutrality. But Bondi remembered a private fundraiser in Virginia years ago, where Stones joked about what the Trump kids will do when the house of cards falls. He'd smiled when he said it. And now he had brought that private disdain into his courtroom. When court resumed after a short break, the prosecution prepared to present the next witness. But Bondi stood before the judge could speak. "Your Honor," she said firmly, "before we proceed, the Department of Justice would like to address a matter of bias affecting the fairness of this trial." Judge Stones frowned. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that you made a personal insult to a government witness, Mr. Trump, before this courtroom while he was under oath. We believe your statements reflect prejudice that could compromise this case." A low hum ran through the courtroom. The defense attorneys stiffened, eyes narrowing. Stones let out a dry laugh. "You're accusing me of bias because I made a sarcastic comment." Bondi stepped forward. "I'm stating that your pattern of conduct, including off-record remarks made prior to this hearing, shows intent to undermine a legal witness and influence public opinion." "Do you have proof of these off-record remarks?" Stone said, the grin on his face now fading. Bondi didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned to her assistant, who handed her a sealed brown envelope. Slowly, Bondi pulled out a typed document with a DOJ seal. "This," she said clearly, "is a signed affidavit from a former judicial aide who worked under your office between 2019 and 2021. In it, she describes some multiple private statements made by you during politically sensitive cases, including this one statement showing clear political bias against the Trump family and their affiliates." Gasps again. Stone sat back, no longer smiling. "I'll need to see that," he said. Bondi handed the document to the court clerk, who passed it up to the bench. As Stones flipped through the affidavit, the room stayed silent. Barron, now seated behind Bondi, looked down, trying not to react. He'd been coached to never show too much. Never let them know what bothers you. The judge skimmed the document, his hand tightening slightly as he turned each page. "This is an unsigned claim," he said finally. "It could be fabricated." "The witness is in the building," Bondi replied. "We can bring her in right now." Stones paused. "No, not today," he said. "We'll address that separately." "You mean privately?" Bondi said. The two locked eyes. Everyone in the room could feel the temperature drop. The judge looked away first. "Proceed with your next witness," he said, voice quieter now. But Bondi didn't move. "Your Honor, we are also submitting a request for a judicial review, an emergency oversight from the Chief Judge of the Federal District. You're moving to have me reviewed mid-trial. For the integrity of this case, yes, there it was. A line drawn in public, one that couldn't be erased. A reporter stood up quietly and stepped outside. Seconds later, push notifications began lighting up phones around the courtroom. CNN breaking news. DOJ challenges federal judge mid-trial in Trump enterprise case. Bondi sat down calmly. Her assistant leaned in. You sure this is the right moment? She nodded. Stones isn't just biased. It's part of something bigger, and we're close. Outside, protesters began forming around the courthouse. Some held signs reading "Free Barron," while others demanded Bondi's resignation. The trial was no longer just about legal arguments. It was now a national storm. And Bondi was ready to walk straight into it. Inside the courtroom, the storm kept growing, even if the walls were silent. Judge Stones returned to his chambers early, cutting the day short. He claimed it was to review the affidavit and consider procedural motions, but everyone understood. What had happened? A line had been crossed. Publicly, outside the courthouse had turned into a battlefield of narratives. On one side, Trump supporters held signs and chanted slogans demanding respect for Barron. On the other, critics of the former president accused Bondi of staging political theater to protect a crumbling empire. Cable news vans lined the streets. Headlines rolled like thunder. Judge under fire, Doge strikes back. Barron Trump targeted in court. Barron sat quietly in the DOJ conference room beside Pam Bondi. He had remained composed through the whole day, but his silence now had a weight to it. Bondi could tell. You held it together better than most adults would have, she said, pouring coffee into a paper cup. But I know that look. Barron finally looked up. Hey, he wanted to humiliate me. Not just meme my family. He didn't care if it was legal or not. Just wanted a moment on camera. He got his moment, she said. Now we take it away. Bondi's team huddled in the corner, speaking in low voices. One of her senior counsels, Meredith Crane, stepped forward with a tablet. We found something, Crane said, tapping the screen. A pattern of rulings Stones has presided over. 5 politically charged cases in the past 4 years. In all 5, he ruled against Trump-related figures despite weak evidence in at least 2. Coincidence? Bondi asked. Maybe, but it gets better. 3 of the lead attorneys who benefited from his rulings were at that Virginia fundraiser. You mentioned, same place Stones was photographed smiling with DNC donors. Bondi's eyes narrowed. We need those images. Get me timestamps. And call in Lisa from Media Forensics. Then her phone buzzed. An encrypted call. Chief Judge Harmon, the voice said. Sir, Bondi answered, standing up immediately. I've reviewed the affidavit you sent. It's also the request for emergency oversight. You'll have it. A judicial ethics panel will begin preliminary inquiry tomorrow. Stones won't be presiding until it's complete. Bondi exhaled. That alone was a massive victory. Thank you, sir, but Harmon wasn't done. And Bondi? Be careful. This is bigger than a courtroom. Someone is playing a long game here. The line went dead. By morning, federal marshals had replaced the court's internal security. The ethics panel's team entered through a private entrance. Judge Stones was no longer at the bench. In his place sat Judge Letitia Morris, a strict but fair jurist known for having no tolerance for games, political or otherwise. News anchors described it as a rare and dramatic shakeup mid-trial. Social media exploded with theories. Who pulled the trigger? Who was afraid of what would come out next? Barron Trump walked in that morning to a very different courtroom. Same architecture, same lawyers. But the atmosphere had shifted. For the first time, it felt like justice might actually have a chance. Bondi began her cross-examination of a key witness, a former internal auditor from Trump Enterprises. His name was Alan Drexler. Nervous, balding, and clearly sweating under pressure, Drexler had been offered immunity in exchange for cooperation. "Mr. Drexler," Bondi said slowly, "on what date did you first become aware of unauthorized transfers to foreign accounts?" "January 2023, he replied. "I flagged the first one during a quarterly report review." "Did you report this to your supervisors?" "Yes, I emailed Marcus Welford, the company's general counsel." Bondi turned toward the defense. Table Welford sat still, stone-faced. "Did Mr. Welford respond to your email?" "No," Drexler admitted. "But a week later, I was moved off the audit team." There it was, a link. Bondi turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I request that the court admit into evidence the original audit files and the email chain between Mr. Drexler and Mr. Welford." Judge Morris nodded. "Granted." And then the moment shifted again, because from the back of the courtroom, a woman rose. Not a journalist, not a lawyer. She walked straight to Bondi and whispered something in her ear. Bondi's eyes widened, then narrowed. She turned toward the bench. "Your Honor, I request a brief recess. We've received new information that may require immediate action." The judge agreed. Outside, Bondi followed the woman down a side hallway. She was in her 30s, wore glasses, and held a small encrypted USB in her hand. "I used to work with Stones," the woman said. "I never spoke up before, but I saw what he did to Barron. That broke something in me." "What's on the drive?" Bondi asked. "Proof that Stones had contact with an international firm linked to the defense. He wasn't just biased, he was compromised." Pam Bondi took the drive with a calm nod. "You just changed everything." Pam Bondi stared at the drive in her hand like it was a detonator. The woman who handed it to her, quiet, nondescript, but clearly terrified, had slipped away down the hallway before Bondi could even ask her name. It didn't matter. What mattered was what she claimed the USB held. Proof that Judge Andrew H. Stones had been in secret communication with an international consulting firm tied to foreign governments and the defense's shadow clients. Back inside the DOJ war room, Bondi closed the blinds, locked the door, and handed the drive to Meredith Crane. "We need this scanned, verified, and isolated from all DOJ servers. Use the dark lab. No digital trail." Crane nodded. "Give me 20 minutes." 20 minutes in a story like this felt like 20 hours. In the meantime, Bondi returned to the courtroom, her face composed, hiding the whirlwind under her skin. Barron Trump sat at the far end, still unreadable. But his posture upright, unshaken, reminded Bondi of someone else. His father. She hated to admit it, but whatever else people said about the Trumps, they didn't bend easily. The courtroom buzzed again. Judge Letitia Morris took her seat. Bondi requested a brief delay in the witness schedule pending newly discovered material. Evidence. The judge granted it, sensing the gravity in Bondi's tone. As Bondi stepped out again, her phone vibrated. "Crane, you're going to want to see this." The secure DOJ room smelled faintly of ozone, old carpet, and urgency. Crane pulled up the file structure from the USB on an isolated monitor. "It's real," she said. "Time-stamped messages between Stones and a DC-based intermediary for an international legal firm, Casper and Velt. They're not registered lobbyists. They have undisclosed clients in Qatar, Luxembourg, and even China." Bondi's jaw tightened. What were they discussing? Crane scrolled. "A series of payments to a dormant LLC, Windsor Strategies. It's linked to Stone's brother-in-law, who runs a consultancy in New Jersey. Total payments over the last 8 months. $840,000. That was it. That was the leverage behind his smug smirk. That was the motive behind his attack on Barron. Stones wasn't just biased, he was bought." Bondi picked up her encrypted phone and called the chief judge again. "Harmon speaking." "It's worse than we thought," she said. "International influence through a proxy firm. He's dirty. I'm sending you the files now and requesting DOJ's special integrity to join the investigation." If we delay, this becomes a national crisis. Harmon didn't hesitate. Done. I'll authorize an emergency hearing at 4 p.m. You'll lead. Bring everything. By 3:45 p.m., the courtroom had become a furnace of tension. Rumors had already begun leaking to the press. News tickers rolled phrases like foreign influence, corruption on the bench, and Bondi uncovers shocking links. No one knew exactly what was coming, but everyone knew it would be big. When Bondi re-entered the courtroom at 3:58, she carried a single folder, her expression sharper than a drawn blade. She walked to the podium as the judge entered, flanked this time by two federal ethics observers. Judge Morris addressed the room. We are resuming proceedings under a special hearing designation. Ms. Bondi, you may proceed. Bondi opened the folder. Your Honor, the Department of Justice has uncovered digital communications and financial transfers suggesting that the original presiding judge, Andrew H. Stones, was under improper influence from a foreign-tied consulting firm with direct connections to the defense's financial structures. Gasps rippled through the room. The defense attorney Marcus Welford stood up. Your Honor, I object. Sit down, Morris snapped. You'll have your moment, Bondi continued. We have verified payments to an entity controlled by Judge Stone's brother-in-law, totaling nearly $1 million. This material, verified under DOJ's cybersecurity protocols, raises the possibility of compromised judicial conduct. Reporters scribbled furiously. The courtroom audience leaned in. And Your Honor, Bondi said, locking eyes with Maurice. These communications suggest that Judge Stones was instructed to steer this case to weaken witness credibility and ensure an acquittal, particularly by attacking Barron Trump's role in the case. Barron's eyes didn't blink. He simply sat still, his world exploding in slow motion around him. Therefore, Bondi said, we request Judge Stones be placed under federal investigative custody pending full inquiry, and that his prior rulings be frozen under judicial integrity provisions. Judge Morris didn't even pause. Request granted. Before the gavel could fall, the rear door of the courtroom opened and walked federal marshals. They were already moving. A stunned silence filled the room as Pam Bondi turned toward the gallery. Her voice, calm and controlled, cut through the air. Judge Andrew Stones has been taken into custody. Outside the courthouse, the world had changed. News helicopters hovered overhead. Protesters, reporters, and political operatives crowded the plaza like it was a battleground. Cable news anchors, speaking over each other, speculated in real time as talking heads analyzed Pam Bondi's shocking move against Judge Stones. The Justice Department's surprise revelation had triggered a firestorm. Inside a black SUV with blackout windows, Bondi sat quietly, listening to a briefing on speakerphone. Our review of the communications confirms Judge Stones coordinated with at least one foreign national. He knew they were connected to defense finance operations, looking at a violation of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Bondi didn't answer immediately. She looked out the window. Protesters were holding signs, some thanking her, others accusing her of staging a political takedown. That was the cost of moving against power in public view. There was no safe side, only the truth or the cover-up. Back at DOJ headquarters, she met with FBI Deputy Director Neil Foster. He looked tense. We found something else, he said, cryptid backups in Stone's personal iCloud account. They're not DOJ protected. He used a private system. One of the files includes a video recording. It's taken the night before trial. He tapped his keyboard. The video opened. It was grainy, time-stamped, and without audio. But the body language was unmistakable. Stones, Marcus, Welford. And a third man unidentified but wearing a diplomatic pin from a Middle Eastern embassy. They sat around a glass conference table. In a private law office in Georgetown, papers changed hands. Stones pointed to a manila envelope, then to a television monitor. Then came the unmistakable moment. Stones lifted a finger, tracing a name written on the monitor: Barron Trump. Bondi leaned forward, reading the movements carefully. She didn't need sound to understand. They were planning a public hit, not just a legal strategy, but character assassination. Foster spoke quietly. They targeted him intentionally. Stones was going to break him on the stand to collapse the DOJ's narrative. If Barron cracked, the whole case falls apart. Bondi, close the laptop. Want that third man identified. Every connection, every hotel booking, every meeting. If foreign actors tried to steer this case, it's not just corruption, subversion. By 6 p.m., the FBI had issued a federal detainment order for Marcus Welford, who had mysteriously left the courtroom during the chaos. The third man remained unknown, but now the Justice Department was operating under emergency protocol, redesignating the Trump Enterprises case as a high-risk legal proceedings under compromise threat, or HRL-PCT. Inside the courtroom, Judge Letitia Morris reconvened the hearing. Barron Trump, still on the witness list, had not been recalled. Bondi had insisted on postponing his second testimony until the courtroom's integrity could be restored. But as the news media speculated about a hung trial, Barron quietly approached her in the hallway. "I want to speak," he said. Pam turned. "This isn't necessary anymore. We have enough." "It is," he replied, "because they tried to bury me. I don't want the next 20 years of my life shaped by silence." She looked at him. He was young, but his voice didn't shake. Back in the courtroom, when Barron was sworn back in, the room stood still. Cameras rolled silently. Reporters barely breathed. Bondi approached slowly. "Mr. Trump," she began, "can you tell the court what you discovered about the internal accounts labeled echelon within the Trump Enterprises finance structure?" Barron took a moment, then responded clearly. "I found a set of accounts that weren't listed in our quarterly audits. They were categorized as offshore consultancy fees. But the recipients didn't provide services, at least not legitimate ones. Were these payments linked to any foreign interests?" "Yes, I cross-referenced the recipients with federal sanctioned databases. At least 2 had indirect connections to flagged entities in Eastern Europe and the Gulf states. And when you brought this to the attention of internal counsel, what happened?" Barron looked down. "That I didn't understand global leverage. I was told to go back to college and leave the real decisions to the executives." Pam paused. "So why did you come forward now?" Barron exhaled. "Because if this is who we are, if silence is the rule, then everything I grew up around is a lie. And I don't want to inherit a lie." The courtroom remained completely silent. Even Bondi didn't speak for a moment, so the reporters looked frozen. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, as if reality had shifted. Then a single flash from the gallery, a camera. The moment immortalized. Pam Bondi closed her folder and nodded to the bench. "No further questions." Judge Morris tapped her gavel softly. "Witness is dismissed. And for the record, let this court recognize the clarity and composure of Mr. Barron Trump in delivering this testimony under extraordinary pressure." As Barron stepped down, the crowd did not applaud, but they watched. All of America watched. And beyond them, in embassies and corporate towers around the world, eyes widened. Because they had underestimated the boy and awakened the storm that evening. Washington wasn't just watching, it was recalculating. The testimony of Barron Trump had not just pierced the courtroom walls, it had crossed borders. In European intelligence circles, encrypted messages started flooding secure servers. Diplomats demanded briefings. In Riyadh, a late-night security session was called. In Moscow, 3 oligarchs canceled flights and sent private instructions to offshore trustees because the accounts Barron had exposed. They weren't just consultancy fees. They were pressure point soft blackmail systems, shell companies, for strategic influence long hidden beneath layers of plausible deniability. Now, a 19-year-old had cracked the code live on television. In the Justice Department's war room. Pam Bondi reviewed a red file marked Priority Hostile Financial Infrastructure. FBI Deputy Director Neil Foster stood beside her. Pacing, the echelon transfers connect directly to a dummy firm in Cyprus. That firm then wired funds to a PR shell in New York, the same one used to hire an unofficial media consultant for Judge Stones back in 2021. It's not just corruption, Pam. It's international laundering tied to federal appointments. Bondi leaned in. Who approved the judge's travel to Istanbul last November? State Department listed it as private judiciary development. But his expenses were reimbursed by a Turkish-American trade group founded by a man on the DOJ's no-lobby list. Pam slammed the file shut. This case has been hijacked from the inside. We're not just prosecuting financial fraud anymore, Ray. Unraveling a foreign influence network inside the judiciary. A silence filled the room. For a moment, no one moved. Then Bondi turned to her lead intelligence liaison. I want that press leak about Barron's testimony buried. If we let this become a circus, they'll discredit the whole investigation. Too late, the liaison replied. Reuters is reporting that Russian-linked funds were used in the same shell firms Barron identified. Bondi didn't flinch. Then we fight this in public now. We go full transparency. Meanwhile, inside a Georgetown brownstone lined with marble floors and dark leather furniture, Marcus Welford, the vanished defense attorney, was quietly transferring data from a black encrypted drive. The man beside him, the same unidentified diplomat from the hotel footage, wore a pale gray suit and barely blinked. The Americans don't understand what's coming, the diplomat said. They still think it's about family businesses. Welford nodded. We'll drop the next file tomorrow. Bondi's credibility will collapse when the media sees her 2013 Ukraine trip. The diplomat raised an eyebrow. That trip was authorized by NATO. She met with an oil magnate who now funds her campaign PAC. Welford answered, we don't need facts, just the shadow. The diplomat smiled faintly. Good, let them chase ghosts while we finish the real objective. By the next morning, every major network in America had turned the Trump courtroom saga into a full-blown national obsession. CNN ran it as the trial that changed the bench. Fox News called it Barron's moment. MSNBC called it the collapse of judicial integrity. In the White House briefing room, the president's island until now gave a curt statement. We support the independence of the courts. But when corruption infects that independence, it becomes a national security threat. He did not mention Stones by name, but the message was clear. Outside the DOJ building, Barron Trump waited silently behind a tinted window. He was being kept out of sight for his own safety. Online threats had surged since the trial. Pam Bondi had personally authorized a federal protection detail. Inside, Pam stood before her staff. Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't just about Barron anymore. This is about whether our legal system has been weaponized by foreign actors using our own officials as tools. A young aide raised his hand. What if they release the Ukraine file, ma'am? They will, Pam said calmly. And when they do, we show every dollar was approved. We show every itinerary, every meeting log. We win this not just by fighting, but by proving we have nothing to hide. In the hallway, the TV blared breaking news. Former Judge Andrew H. Stones has filed a motion claiming his arrest was politically motivated. His attorneys are seeking to suppress the evidence submitted by Attorney General Bondi, alleging the DOJ has been compromised by pro-Trump operatives. It was a desperate move. But in Washington, desperate moves made headlines. The sun hadn't risen yet, but America was already awake. Barron Trump's televised message had gone viral overnight. It was raw, unscripted, and chillingly honest. From cable news panels to late-night commentary, it was being dissected frame by frame, not because of who he was, but because of what he'd become. a reluctant truth-teller in a crumbling system. And now, the world demanded resolution. By 7 a.m., the front steps of the U.S. District Courthouse in D.C. looked like a battlefield of microphones and flashing lenses. Reporters elbowed for space. Protesters shouted on both sides. One banner. Read, judicial treason is still treason. Another read, Pam Bondi equals Trump's fixer. Inside, Judge Stones sat once again this time, not behind the bench. He was the accused now. And across the courtroom, Pam Bondi entered with the weight of the federal government behind her. She wore no smile, no smugness, just silence and sharp eyes. Next to her sat Barron Trump, guarded by 2 U.S. Marshals. Everyone rose, but not for Stones. This time it was for Judge Elena Myrica, federal judge flown in overnight under emergency order. Carried no favor with either party, but her reputation for brutal honesty was well known. She banged the gavel once. Proceed. Bondi stood and delivered the opening the nation had waited for. Your Honor, this is not merely about contempt or misconduct. It is about a federal judge who compromised his bench by accepting foreign-linked funds, by manipulating court outcomes, and by mocking a civilian witness in open court. That witness happened to be the son of a former president. But this case would matter even if he weren't. She walked slowly toward the table where Stones sat. He didn't look up. This is not a partisan takedown. This is national triage. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Welford, the defense attorney, rose quickly. Objection. These are baseless political accusations meant to sway public sentiment. Judge Myrick interrupted him coldly. Sit down. You'll speak when it's your turn, Bondi continued. We have traced funds from a Cypriot shell company through to U.S. firms, both connected to Stones. We've cross-verified email exchanges between Judge Stones and a foreign intermediary suggesting he would rule favorably in cases involving certain clients in exchange for conference donations. These are not allegations. These are facts. Submitted, verified. And then she played the audio. The court listened to a hidden recording retrieved from an anonymous whistleblower of Stones in a private conversation with Marcus Welford, laughing over his ability to undermine the Trump brand from the bench. The voice was unmistakable. Laughter. Then this line, all it takes is a smirk and a ruling. The boy won't even see it coming. In the gallery, reporters froze. One journalist whispered, "This is a judicial bombshell." Judge Myrick leaned forward. Mr. Stones, do you have a response? For the first time, Stones spoke. His voice was tired, low. This is a smear campaign. That audio is out of context. The DOJ is weaponized, and this is all political theater. But even his own defense team looked shaken. Welford sat still, jaw tight. Myrick turned to Bondi. Does the Department of Justice have a final request? Pam nodded. Yes, Your Honor. We move to have Judge Andrew H. Stones formally disbarred, indicted for bribery, and placed in federal custody pending trial. And we request this courtroom be sealed for the remainder of the national security investigation tied to the HEN. I took Cotuan like Sarah Squeeze, and we all know I've been exploring that. And we all know I've been exploring that path. And indicted for bribery. And we again did for bridey end. And we see a catty commo with a pre-priosti E. And we walk with KTAY. We see quote with KITY with EWA quotey with quade quo with sick KTATHA like I say to be with you side you see with Elisa I can me you get you guy got kite you side or I kite you cly cat kick it I have to can you get it in me I think you to get I to the week I would you guys I could okay guys he got Cyprus Fund transfers. Myrick looked down at the files for a moment. The room was dead silent. Then she banged her gavel. Motion granted. Gasps exploded across the courtroom. Stone stood up in protest, but within seconds, U.S. Marshals surrounded him. He shouted, "This is a coup. This is dictatorship." But no one was listening. He was cuffed right there, in the same courtroom where he had mocked Barron Trump just days before. And as he was escorted out, Barron sat still, eyes ahead. No smile, no satisfaction, only a long, quiet exhale. Outside, the cameras were already rolling as Bondi exited the building with Barron behind her. Questions flew like bullets. Attorney: General Bondi, was this a Trump operation from the start? Barron, how do you feel about being the face of a political scandal? Pam stopped. She turned to the crowd. This is not about politics. This is about integrity. We are either a nation of laws or we're not. And as long as I hold this office, no one, no judge, no lawyer, no politician is above the law. And then she walked away. That night, in a quiet apartment above the Potomac, Barron stood alone at the window. He'd been offered TV deals, security details, even a book contract. He refused them all, 'cause this story was never about him. It was about a country fighting for its soul. And maybe, just maybe, finally waking up.